I can't believe it's July, and it is July the 7th. We're recording this. This is the Breaking Down Security Podcast, and I'm Brian Brake. With me this week, of course, my little poncho to my lefty, that would be Mr. Betcher. Welcome, sir.
What's up?
Yep. Ms. Berlin, sadly, is not here this week. You don't stop the recording. Don't stop playing. We've got plenty of content going on this week. So she said she might call in later, but I told her not to because she was spending time with her family. And, I'm nothing if not a happy leader who, more than allows people to just spend time with their family, as we heard with Mr. Betcher a couple of weeks ago. So we're going to wing it this week without her. So do you think we can do that, Mr. Betcher?
Well, it won't be as good. Sorry.
Wow.
No,
wow.
But we have backup. We do have backup.
That's right. We
green room right now.
Yep. We actually had to have two people to replace her this week. So please welcome to the show from Rhino Security, Ben Caudill, and oh god, hang on now, I got it, Spencer Gietzen.
Yep, you got it.
Yeah.
You remember the rule.
Bite me, Mr. Betcher. Yeah. Anyway, so before we get started, I would like to ask Spencer, because he, is the first person I'm looking at right now. Maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll do Ben second, and then we'll get to the topic in question here. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Spencer.
Okay, so I grew up doing a lot of different programming languages. Started out with Java, taught myself PHP, dabbled in many other languages, both in high school and college. And then I ended up at Code Fellows in Seattle, which is a software development boot camp. And I specialized in full stack JavaScript. So I graduated from there. And shortly after that, I came on board with Rhino. So now I'm a penetration tester with a focus in cloud security.
Interesting. Okay. Very nice. Ben, how about yourself?
Yeah. So I actually started on the blue team. Was actually in incident response. Way back in the day at Boeing was my first job in cybersecurity, and several years of bouncing around and different career paths there. Ended up a little over 5 years ago now. Man, time flies when you're having fun.
Wow.
5 years ago, founded Rhino Security Labs. As the founder and CEO, obviously keep a pretty good handle on the research side and the technical side as well. So, that's Spencer and myself.
Very cool. All right. So both of you are developing your coding and everything, and you're going to be speaking at Bsides Las Vegas this year about a tool that you guys have created. It's called Pacu. Now, does Pacu stand for something? Is it?
Yeah, it's actually the name of a piranha that actually lives in the Amazon. So that's where we got the name from. Okay,
all right. So I thought it might have something to do, like segue into what the software does, but obviously that's not the case. But that sounds cool. I appreciate the nice short name, and it's not something that is rated R or whatever, like it was last year with Meat Pistol or whatever. So
yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about what Pacu is. Maybe you could shed some light on that and tell us what that is.
Yeah. So Pacu is an offensive tool, a tool for penetration testers and cloud security engineers to demonstrate AWS security vulnerabilities by exploiting them. There's a number of other tools out there that are developing, identifying various vulnerabilities and misconfigurations in your infrastructure. But we as penetration testers have historically had a really hard time with the actual exploitation process and what do we actually do with this particular bug or this particular misconfiguration. And obviously, demonstrating that to clients, to individuals, and even ourselves, understanding what those vulnerabilities can do, what the impact is absolutely important. It's critical to our work. So, ended up actually building this tool to exploit many of those vulnerabilities that you see with other tools out there, Scout 2 being one of the bigger ones, CloudSploit and others, that identify these vulnerabilities, but you don't really, as the user, don't really have the context of, how would this be used? Is this, can this be weaponized? How serious or how big of an impact is this? Or again, is this one of those kind of theoretical, I'll say lab grade bugs that can't really be exploited in the real world? And we've ourselves seen this with clients, and very quickly found that bringing Pacu to organizations and using this, or even other researchers, we can very quickly kind of dispel some of those myths. So that's how that came about and why we built it.
Cool. Mr. Betcher, you have any questions? Because I've got some thoughts, but I wanted to let you, get your nose in here and let it get started.
No, go ahead. Okay.
So you said it's a tool for offensive people that to exploit these things. Is that a good thing to be able to run these exploits on an environment? Because I know enough from the AWS environment to know that you have to ask permission to do any kind of pen testing for, like they'll blacklist your IPs and stuff for certain things. Also, there's a vast number of products in AWS. Does this look at everything, or does this look at certain products in the AWS environment?
Yeah, good question. So first, around penetration testing, obviously make sure that you get approval from AWS. You go through the penetration testing approval process. There's a form that they have you fill out. We've been through it a number of times. It's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. In terms of the actual services, obviously there's hundreds of services available on AWS, all sorts of different APIs and functionality that's coming out constantly. There's all sorts of new features added on a regular basis and just changed as well. No, it certainly doesn't cover everything. Not yet anyway. Okay. We do have it coming open source, so we're really looking to kind of grow the user base and grow the number of people developing on the platform. But I don't know exactly how many services we necessarily support, but I would say it's more about what are the vulnerabilities, or what are the how common are the different services. Obviously, something like S3 or EC2 is much more common than some of the more obscure ones. But what are the vulnerabilities within those? What are the misconfigurations? How could you leverage this as an attacker? And what makes most sense, given the number of environments that you'll typically see.
Right. Yeah, I know a lot of organizations tend to use the S3 for the, static websites or what have you. They like to use things like Route 53 for DNS. They use the security groups. Elasticsearch, Elastic Load Balancers are always very popular. Not RDP, but RDS, which is their Postgres and MySQL DB clustering. So how do you know that this tool is going to work when you take it into an environment? Let's say you are using this on an engagement and they have, X, Y, and Z things. Is this extensible? Can you add to it? I mean, the idea sounds like it is extensible. It's a framework, right?
Yeah, exactly. Hit the nail on the head. Very, very modular platform. Again, we're regularly developing the framework itself and making it simpler and easier to use and more functional. But yes, anybody can build new modules for this. And again, we kind of need to build it that way to make it expandable to the point of being able to hit all those different services. Obviously, there's a lot that AWS is producing that we can't certainly keep up with. In terms of how that's done, again, there's a lot of the heavy lifting is done on the framework itself. The regions that are actually supported, the different API calls, and making sure that the scripts that you write, the modules that you write, are actually usable, and you can use that data in other modules as well. So there's a number of things that we kind of built around to ensure that it's easy to extend, it's easy to edit, and at the same time you're not spending your own time, your own energy, constantly having to maintain your own modules.
Right. So what scripting language does this use? Is it Python? Is it Ruby? Is it Go?
Yep, all in Python.
All in Python. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. So when you talk about vulnerabilities in AWS, it's not really vulnerabilities with AWS itself. Is that right, or is it more misconfiguration of AWS by the users, right, by the company?
Yeah, you're correct on that. So any AWS vulnerabilities that you discover, you pretty much have to report them directly to Amazon, and then they decide if they want to fix them or not. But Pacu is more built around vulnerabilities in how you set up your environment on AWS and how to exploit those.
Okay,
gotcha.
Oftentimes we kind of use the analogy of like AWS kind of provides you the building materials to make your own building, right? They don't build the skyscraper for you, but if you don't know what you're using or don't know what you're doing, even good architects can put things together insecurely or poorly and have obviously major disasters as a result. A building collapses. It's not necessarily. It certainly isn't the concrete manufacturer that is to blame. But it is obviously a very complicated series of technologies, series of APIs and services. And I think very often people get a little confused as to what the implications are or misunderstand how serious some of those things can be.
Mm-hmm. So what is the difference between this tool and something like Scout 2 or something you would do for Linux auditing like Lynis or whatever?
Yeah, sure. So Scout 2, great tool. Obviously also an AWS security tool, more on the, I would say, kind of an AWS vulnerability scanner, essentially, looking for many of the same things, but reporting on improper permissions or a break in security best practices, I would say. So in that sense, we kind of use like the Nessus and Metasploit sort of analogy. Scout 2, great as a vulnerability scanner. Pacu is more of the kind of Metasploit for the cloud, so to speak, the actual exploit toolkit to demonstrate and leverage those vulnerabilities that are identified. Okay.
Can you give me an example of what the output would look like when you ran this? Because like Mr. Betcher said, it was mostly misconfigurations, right? I mean, you're not going to... are there actual exploits in this, or are you just, notifying people that there are vulnerabilities?
No, it is, and we can certainly speak to some of those deeper examples. And privilege escalation is a good use case there. Very often we will find, IAM issues where a user that should be segmented or has very limited permissions has a permission or a configuration issue that allows it to allows the attacker to take over another account and use that permission or use that key to access resources that you can then pivot off of using other services. Mm-hmm. Lambda is another one that you're talking about. Different services, very unique to AWS. Lambda, the number of capabilities and the number of ways that can be abused is certainly of very relevant interest to us, and certainly featured pretty prominently in Pacu. A number of different things that, yes, are very exploitable, not just a notification to the user.
Okay. What does the output look like for something like this? Can you get a fancy report? Does it, is it all text? Because I'm looking at the blog post, and there's a link in our show notes to the blog post. A lot of this looks like you're using the AWS command line to be able to make these changes or add these roles, or so you're kind of extending the AWS API, right?
So in the blog post, actually, those are all the AWS CLI commands that I used for those examples. But Pacu's all in Python, so it's using the Boto3 library to interact with the API.
Okay.
Yeah, so a lot of the, I guess obviously depending on what the module is, the output differs. But we've got a database, SQLite database system set up to where any information that you may need in the future is stored for that. And then if there's a module that we have one module that enumerates various EC2 resources. Then say an exploit module needs a list of all the EC2 instances. First, it'll check the database, find that data, and use it if it's there. And if it's not, then it'll offer you to go and use that enumeration module to find that list.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so things like the privilege escalation scanner, the blog post is all about, so the script I included in that is kind of a subset of what's included in Pacu. That's just a scanner, but still a work in progress. But the one that's in Pacu exploits those methods too. So if it detects that your account can escalate privileges via this method, I'm going to try and do that now. Or do you want me to do that now, I guess? And then it'll try and get admin permissions as easy as possible for the user.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I see some of the output here. Looks like CSV reports, which is my second favorite security tool, Excel.
Right.
And it looks like, okay, so you have confirmed and potential for different policies or different categories, right? So when it says confirm, that means it appears that the tool attempted to exploit like update existing glue dev endpoint, and then it was confirmed it was able to do that. And potential, can you kind of walk us through those two scenarios? For example, pass existing role to cloud formation potential. What happened on the back end, and why does it say there's a potential there? So for AWS IAM permissions, you can specify what resources you're allowed to use those permissions on. So an example is the EC2 run instances permission. Obviously, there's no specific resources you can set for that, as you haven't created the instances yet. But something like IAM pass role, where you can pass a role to another resource in your AWS account, you can restrict that to a certain subset of roles. And so the confirmed versus potential, I didn't code it to check the resources. So if it detects the permission, but it detects that it's not wildcard accessible, then it says it's a potential because, you have that permission, but maybe you're not able to use it on the resource required or something like that. But all the confirmed are permissions that you can act on any resource.
Cool. Okay. So I have another question. So I'm a blue teamer and I'm listening to this and I'm going, great, there's yet another tool. And, for red teamers to make my life a living hell. And how I want to use it to check my environment before I allow someone like you to come in and, poke around on my stuff. One, without having to do the actual exploits, is there a way that it will run in kind of like a check mode or something before it attempts to actually do the exploits, or is that not the reason behind Pacu?
So some of the different modules, they will usually try to check if the permissions are accessible, if that's possible, before acting on them, and then you can either pass in an argument to skip those checks and just try to exploit it, or also to prompt you. So if you run privilege escalation, you could pass in an argument that will then prompt you saying, okay, this is the information I found. Do you now want me to try and exploit it, or do you want to keep moving on? And so as I'm developing the modules, I'm trying to set it up to where you'll get a prompt before it starts exploiting, so that if that's all the information you want, then that's there. Right.
Okay. So you're running this and it's doing, it's interacting with the AWS API through the Bodo libraries. What in the way of permissions do you need to be able to do everything that you're going to be doing? I assume this is not for black box testing. You're going to have some kind of access to the organization's AWS environment. You can't just, run random, API. You have to have the API keys, which would mean you would have to be an actual user on the account. So, do you have to have root? Because if you have root, then there's really no point in running the command or the tool at this point, I would think, because you already have root access. So if you're using it to exploit and to escalate your privileges, is just having a user account on there enough to be able to run Pacu?
Yeah, good question. So actually, there are actually some modules that are that can be run unauthenticated. I mean, everybody knows about the S3 misconfiguration issues that have been going around for years now.
Right.
Certainly, those are less common than they were even a couple of years ago. But there are certainly other resources, a number of other resources that have very similar types of public misconfigurations or public permissions that you can set. Whether they're default or not, there are always some subset of users that have those. So we do actually have checks and capabilities to scan unauthenticated and look for those vulnerabilities as well. As far as the keys themselves, you're right that a lion's share of the modules and capabilities are authenticated with some level of permission. But no, certainly it wouldn't make any sense to be running it with root. You're exactly right. Right. It's more about at the point where this key is compromised, right? The key for one of your developers or something that's on your app server, an API key that's that's using AWS. At the point where this is compromised through some event, some bad guy gets this key, what can they actually do with that? Right? And again, nail on the head. Privilege escalation is one of the first things. Great, I have this very limited lockdown key, that these very few restrictive permissions. Is there some way that I can jump into another account? Is there some way I can get resources that I shouldn't be able to? Is there something that I can pivot off of to be able to escalate my privileges before I start enumerating and further exploiting into the environment? Right.
Okay.
Now, this Pacu is on GitHub, so anybody can download it. Anybody can use it for free, right? Will it always be free?
Yeah, the official release will actually be at Bsides Vegas. We'll be presenting there. So that'll be also the official open source release. We actually have a beta right now that anybody can join. Again, the link is there on the blog post. But trying to get some feedback, support and insight from other people that have a lot of experience, obviously with AWS security before that point. But yeah, anybody can join. We have a Slack channel set up and other resources, obviously, and the GitHub link. So yeah, certainly apply for the beta, and we can give you some resources there. To answer your question, yes, we'll always be free. We're not looking to do a bait and switch or anything like that. We use this tool as anybody else. So if we can support the community and build more of a developing or a development community around this tool, that'd be great for everybody. I think that's to everyone's benefit.
Nice.
And I know AWS is really hard. I've used it, and it's very complicated. It's really overwhelming at times, and anything that we can get our hands on to try and to get a handle on potential misconfigurations and whatnot is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed.
So I've got a couple things that I was sitting here thinking. So you made the tool, so you also know how to defend against said tool. What would be some of the quick wins that would make Pacu not as useful to a red teamer?
I think that IAM permissions for your developer users or just any user account is one of the biggest things, because it seems that to some extent it's a misunderstood or just not fully understood service in how specific you can get with your different permissions and what kind of access you can delegate. A lot of time people don't understand so this permission on its own, that makes sense. They can have that. They can have this one. But, I didn't think about, can I somehow use both those permissions to do something else that I didn't consider or something like that? So basically, it's restricting permissions to only exactly what that person needs access to, and whether that's resources specifically or AWS services as a whole.
Mm-hmm. So I'd like to expand on that a little bit. Now, you guys are experienced in attacking AWS infrastructure. Is there any tips you can give security teams that log AWS, through CloudTrail or whatever, hit it into their SIEM? What should they look for, whether it be some combination of log events over a certain period of time, whatever, or a certain number of things hitting? What could we look for to detect what you're going to do? Right.
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things that I'm glad you said, I was just going to say CloudTrail and SIEM. So we're on the same page. In that sense, I would say, first thing that comes to mind for me is actually in many ways, AWS is not so different than many other platforms, or the fundamentals are very similar. Mm-hmm. Authentication has many of the same properties, has many of the same means of defense or identifying malicious activity. CloudTrail for where API keys are being used, where there's login. What are the IP addresses that are accessing those various resources? If you suddenly have a major shift in IP addresses and resources being accessed, that's certainly an indicator. But again, a lot of the techniques that you would leverage, or that you could leverage in other platforms and other more traditional environments, I think are actually very applicable within the conceptual monitoring of AWS environments and CloudTrail in particular. It takes a little bit more, maybe interpretation of some of those fundamentals. But Spencer, anything on your side?
Yeah, I think another big thing is just patterns. There's AWS Guard Duty, which tries to detect patterns in your account, of patterns of access through your users and applications, and flag if those patterns are broken. And I think it's a great idea and a great way to detect these kinds of things, because you might have a user who accesses EC2 only, and he only accesses it from the AWS web console for 2 years straight. And then all of a sudden, from the AWS CLI, he's trying to access IAM, or he's trying to access Lambda. That doesn't make sense in terms of the pattern that he's always followed. And so that's something that definitely could pick up on an attacker.
And what's that called again? It's using sort of analytics, some sort of intelligence that Amazon has already built in to that. And how do I take advantage of it? Does that thing log so that I could get alerts from my regular, alert system?
So Guard Duty in particular, they have a list of what they are looking for, list of findings, and you can run that through CloudWatch to trigger alerts in your account when certain things happen. So if this key is being used on an unknown IP address, alert me and do X, Y, and Z based on that information.
Nice. Would something like adding MFA, multi-factor, to your API calls, would that also add additional security and defeat your tool?
Yeah, definitely. That has a big impact on it. By default, MFA on your AWS user account only applies to the AWS web console. So If I had gotten your username and password, I wouldn't be able to log in. But most cases, that MFA does not apply to access keys. So if you have MFA set up, I might still be able to fully access the account through your access keys. But that's by adding that check into your IAM policies of, is this person MFA authenticated? Okay, now, yes, they have these permissions both on the web console and through access keys.
Right.
And that, of course, is very hard to bypass if you can at all.
Nice. So can this be ran on multiple services? Do you have to pick a specific service? And okay, so let's say that what's the barrier to entry to making modules or to making this extensible? I mean, what do you need to know to be able to do this? Because I'm for people who you've named their firstborn, Guido von Rossum or whatever, or is it like somebody who like me who can just pick it up, on the fly?
We're trying our best to make it so that you can pick it up on the fly. Obviously, need Python knowledge. It's Python 3, so modules are written in Python 3, as well as general AWS knowledge. But if you can understand what your goal is, I'd say it's relatively simple for you to pick it up and start trying to accomplish that goal in Python.
Okay. Sounds good.
You certainly don't need to be an AWS expert or an AWS security expert, certainly, to be able to start building modules and start leveraging those capabilities.
Yeah. Well, the way I'm going is I would make something that would just, crash everything in my environment. And then would this be a tool that you would want to use in a test environment versus a production environment? I assume that you wouldn't want to run anything overly destructive on your production environment. And if you're, running this and you don't exactly know what it's going to do, it could be very detrimental. You could lock people out, right?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, certainly it is an offensive tool, right? It is designed to break things in many different ways. Being aware of what the capabilities are and being knowledgeable as you're using these sort of things, right? Great power, great responsibility, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Test accounts often make sense, right? Being able to better understand where the vulnerabilities are through, testing in a sandbox environment or something like that is certainly recommended. That said, we have run this in, I would say, several dozen production environments. Again, being very aware of how the thing is constructed, obviously, and what the impacts are, being very careful and attuned to those, and have had some phenomenal results. So it's, again, just like any other tool, you need to be aware of what it can do and what the impacts are. But I wouldn't characterize it as particularly unpredictable in the damage or the effects that it can bring to your account.
So it'll say like, override permission settings.py or something like that. The module names are fairly understandable, and the descriptions inside them are also, fairly straightforward.
Yeah, exactly. At least what we currently have out there in the core, obviously, again, as you build other modules or you're building or downloading modules from other sources, obviously, it's kind of buyers beware at that point. But right. Everything that we have within the framework itself is very well documented. I think we have close to 30, 40 modules currently built, and we're looking at several more before the release. Again, all of those very well documented, very well detailed as to what the effects are and what to be aware of, and certainly have several, I would say, kind of logical structures in place to prevent you from kind of hurting yourself, so to speak. There's a very predictable sort of pattern and user experience in being able to use that, and there's nothing that you don't expect as you go through it.
Right. So other than just being destructive, could you do things like start up additional instances of EC2 instances or Docker images or Docker instances? Does this have that kind of expandability where you could go, well, I'm going to look for the ability to start up on the first account I find, I'm going to attempt to start up some instances on that box as a way of proving that they're not setting their permissions correctly.
Yeah, actually, it's in progress currently, but there's a permissions brute forcer, basically, module that's in the works. And so we're going to have a couple of different settings on the number of permissions that it's checking and the different services that it hits. But the idea is just figuring out what's possible in the most, obviously noisy way possible, but it's fast and efficient. So if that's how you want to go about it, then you can do it like that.
Right.
That said, actually kind of expanding on that, as much as we have some of these modules that, as Spencer said, is pretty noisy, is pretty, I don't know, a high frequency or high evidence, I guess, in terms of forensics and incident response. We are actually building a number of modules, a number of capabilities in there that are designed for stealth, or are designed for bypassing guard duty or providing misleading logs or other things to otherwise, as you said, cause additional pain to blue teamers.
Right.
And again, I mean, these are all the same capabilities that the bad guys are building and bad guys have. So we're, again, kind of bringing these to the masses, these ideas to the masses. We're really excited to kind of see the education and the level of maturity of AWS security really go up as a result.
Yeah. So the sky's the limit, I think, for this tool as far as automation goes. Right now it's sort of in that sort of vulnerability scanner phase for pen testers. They go in, they scan everything, and then they find out what they can do. It saves them a lot of time on their pen test, which is what you need if you're doing a pen test, because you have limited time, very limited time. So companies allow the scan to take place so that you guys can focus on the real vulnerabilities that you see and don't waste time trying to attack something that's already patched or whatever, right? So I see that here. And then obviously the low and slow stealthy type mode would be an asset as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I would say that the focus is really more on the exploitation side rather than necessarily vulnerability scanning, but certainly, identification and enumeration of those permissions is certainly often a prerequisite of some of the attacks that we lay out there.
But it tells you real quickly what you should focus on or what you cannot do. Like, so Sally has virtually no permission, so don't pick on Sally's account, pick on Bob's, because Bob looks like he could, do a few things, right? That's what I meant.
Possibly. I mean, again, kind of depending on your use case. Again, this is as much developed for penetration testers and kind of the offensive side as it is for the cloud security engineers to kind of demonstrate AWS security risks and those vulnerabilities to the rest of the team. So I would say, as much as there is that capability to kind of scan permissions and brute force and so forth and identify those, it has also been, in fact, we have used it in many cases where we already know that this key has these permissions because it's doing this other thing. It's on this application. We have a module that can exploit this misconfiguration that we know is already present. At the point where we have obtained that AWS key, we can immediately go and exploit this and be able to pull down S3 resources or jump into another account and escalate our privileges or do other things. So there certainly are scanning capabilities in there, but it's more directed at once you have that information, however that comes about, what do you do next? And very often we find that's kind of the harder problem or the harder question to answer.
Right. So, okay, you said you've used. It sounds like you've used this on engagements in the past or whatever. What are some of the typical findings you hit when you do this, and do you let your customers know that you're going to be running some things that may cause undesired operation?
Yeah. So, starting on that second note, actually. While I build these modules, I make a big point of including notes about it or prompts and, kind of withdrawing from the automation when there's something where a certain action might cause like a denial of service, or it might screw up an application. I'll make a note of that saying, you probably don't want to do this because it's going to break the application, right. But do you want to? And so if you're just running it normally, obviously it'll attack different things, change settings, do all these things, but it won't perform any detrimental acts unless you tell it to, basically. So
there's like a switch or something. It's like, if I had ran this to its full extent, we would have gotten X. if I would have been allowed to exploit this, we would have found why. If you want to run this again with the, hey, I know what I'm doing tag, then we'll bang on it a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And so that is, some of our findings are that exactly is, okay, this is 100% possible. An attacker could do it, would do it, but we didn't because it's going to harm your service. And that's not why we're here.
Right. So when you find these on customer engagements, what are some of the recommendations that you give? Is it always the same thing? Hey, make sure your IAM is solid. Is it always the same recommendations? Because it sounds like there's a lot of organizations out there that aren't doing the basics to secure their cloud environment. Are you seeing any kind of outliers or anything other than just IAM based stuff?
So that is something that, frequently that there's notes in there about that and suggestions and different things like that. But beyond that, different services, there's so many different configurations you can have for EC2 instances or Lambda functions or any service really. And so we try and get pretty specific in what exactly we're reporting on. Say something like, okay, I found and exploited this misconfiguration. Here is what that allowed me to do. Maybe that's escalating privileges further, getting access to EC2 instances, et cetera. Or, well, in addition, I'll say, this is what you could have done to stop me
from
doing it, from starting this, as well as here's what you could have done to try and detect me or stop me after.
Okay.
I would say, actually, kind of expanding on that further, one of the other things, kind of go back to a previous note there, remediation is very much, monitoring a response, right? Very, very often we will find that there are, I won't even say, again, vulnerabilities isn't the right term, but there are attack paths, excuse me, that can't necessarily be fixed through configuration changes. You are, you as the user are given a set of tools, and you are using them in this particular way to build this particular thing. If that is not, intended use, or if there are aspects to that can't be, fixed through configuration, sometimes all you can really do is monitor for those problems.
Right.
There's one particular, I guess, extreme example of having actually once compromised root keys themselves, where they had logging on some very basic things, but didn't actually have any sort of analysis or alerting on where those keys were logging in from. There's only so much you can do to prevent that, and maybe we would even argue that that's always a losing battle. But at the point where you can't alert, or you're not alerting on where your root keys are logging in from and who has those and what are the reasons, that in itself is a major risk. That's a vulnerability in itself. So obviously prevention is ideal, but monitoring and response, I would say, is very often where blue teamers have to rely. Right.
No, that makes sense. It just amazes me that, a lot of companies get involved with AWS and they think it's going to solve all their problems, when it just adds an additional layer of difficulty or complexity that they may not be ready for. So, it sounds like this is a tool that has probably been needed for a while. Are there any, do you have any competitors out there? I mean, obviously Scout and things like Lynis, which is just for, hardware Linux stuff, are not very comparable. But is there anything else out there like that, like this tool?
Yeah, I wouldn't say, competitors necessarily. I mean, again, this is open source. I mean, certainly if there's other things that come out there, I mean, we're certainly in support of that if it certainly helps the AWS security community. To answer your question more directly, I don't think we've actually seen much that does anything very similar. I mean, there's a couple of things out there. People will post some miscellaneous scripts here and there, but nothing that really has this kind of long-term modular approach in mind. It's more of kind of here's some scripts that I've thrown together and here's what you can do with them. but again, I mean, certainly we could be unaware of something as well. So
right.
Don't quote me on that.
Cool. All right, Mr. Betcher, do you have any other anything else to? I have one more question, which is just pretty much an informational thing. Do you have anything left?
This would be perfect for DefCon submission. Their tools. They have their tools thing.
Oh, Arsenal.
It's Black Hat Arsenal, but DefCon it's called something else.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. So you said this is in a private beta right now. How would people go ahead and get that? I know it's in the blog post, and there's a link in the blog post if you find it later. But how would they go about getting onto this if they wanted to help you out with creation of modules, or they just want to test it for bugs?
We'll shoot you the link directly. There's just a little Google form, or if anyone wants to contact us directly, again, we're happy to discuss, happy to send the link directly and get you on board. Again, there's, especially as we start off, and there's a lot of variables, a lot of kind of unknown pieces. We're trying to make sure that everybody has the support and the information that they need, rather than just kind of throwing it out to the ether. But yeah, anyone who wants to join, wants to reach out to us, we're happy to support, happy to kind of walk you through it and give you some information. And exactly as you said, certainly interested to get feedback as well. And any support, developers, cloud security engineers, pen testers. It's a pretty open door.
Cool. Excellent. Okay. Ben, Spencer, thank you for joining us. I was wondering if Spencer had a Twitter, or how would people get a hold of either of you if you wanted to discuss Pacu a bit more, or where you guys might be at Bsides Las Vegas if you're there.
Twitter would be perfect for myself at least. It's Ben Gietzen, first for SPENGIETZ, and so that's my Twitter handle, and that's a good way to get a hold of me. Okay.
Very nice. And Ben, how would people get a hold of you if they wanted to discuss Pacu or Bsides Las Vegas? Are you guys going to have any parties, or where you might be?
Yeah, absolutely. Email me directly. I'm old school. I'm not on the Twitters, but Benjamin at rhino.security, and goes directly to me.
All right, sounds great. Excellent. Perfect. And do you know what day you guys are going to be speaking at Bsides?
We don't have that yet, as far as I know.
Has the talk been accepted?
Yeah, it did.
Okay, so you just they haven't released the schedules yet.
Yeah, they haven't given me the exact time, but yeah, it's been accepted.
Okay, very cool. All right, that's awesome, Mr. Betcher. I know that a new episode of BDIR has dropped, breaking down incident response. That will hopefully be out this week once Mr. Goff finishes audio editing. If maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you're going to be talking about.
Yeah, we're going to go over WMI pwnage. We have a guest on that wrote a tool to sort of help people exploit WMI, the way it interacts with the system, and things you can do like upload files, check processes, execute things, kill processes, start services, schedule tasks, all that stuff.
Wow.
So WMI is Windows management instrumentation, so it allows administrators to administer computers easier, right?
Yep.
And as we know, yes, today's problems are yesterday's solutions, right? So WMI has come back to haunt us, just like a lot of other things. And so we're going to talk about that and talk about how you can detect WMI hackery, right, on your system.
Mm-hmm.
So we look for certain logs, certain events, certain things that happen on the different systems, and alert on those events happening. So make sure you give a listen to Breaking Down Incident Response. Like you said, we just dropped a new recorded a new version yesterday, or a new episode.
Yep.
It's if you've never heard it, it's kind of like the Jeffersons to this here Archie Bunker, exactly like that. So check it out. And
wow.
Yeah, well, without the racial slurs and all that.
Okay.
So.
All right. That's fine. That's fine. Right on. Yeah. Okay. Whew. Got me there. Yeah. So how would people get a hold of you if they wanted to discuss more about BDIR or LogMD or anything like that?
Yeah. log-md.com. You can hit me up on the Twitters. Just DM me. My handle is @BetcherPwned. BOETTCHERPWNED.
Cool. Excellent. All right. So Ms. Berlin will be back with us the next time we record. I can't say it's going to be next week. We may have to take a break because of I'm actually going to be speaking, but you can find her at InfoSyster on Twitter, INFOSYSTIR, or on our Slack with the same handle. Speaking of our Slack, a very active Slack community. We have roughly 500 active users and 1,300 accounts, and we are always talking about security on there, and it's pretty much, becoming a kind of a big thing. People are enjoying it. They're finding a lot of good content on there. While we were recording, our CTF club was going on, so we're running through some hack the box challenges there. So we had about 15 or 20 people on our other Zoom that we have to run through some challenges. And if you're interested in that, we have a book club as well. Our summer book club is reading American Kingpin. I think they meet at the end of the month. David Sybuck, one of our moderators, is running that and doing a bang-up job. He also does our bi-weekly podcast book club. So we're doing Practical Packet Analysis 3rd edition with Chris Sanders. Chris has actually joined in on a couple of sessions with us on that. So you've got the author of the book actually, with us on, discussing segments of the book and going over some of the examples. So you don't get that at a lot of, book clubs, being able to speak with the author specifically. And he's on our Slack quite a bit too. So if you're interested in joining us, you can send us a DM to our podcast Twitter at BrakeSec, BRAKESEC. You can also send us an email to bds.podcast@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Brian Brake, BRYANBRAKE. And, we have a Patreon. So if you found value, if you didn't know about Pacu and you've got a massive AWS environment and you're like, man, I probably need this tool to be testing, and this is great. I'm glad, BrakeSec told us about it. Feel free to hit us up with even $1 is $1 more than we had before, and it helps us with things like, paying for equipment upgrades or, getting things that we can, hand out to folks, some swag at conferences. DerbyCon, we're going to be having a table, so we've got some stickers. We're looking at, doing some possible T-shirts. We have a what is that place called? tpub.com, I think. Ms. Berlin set this store up, and you can actually go to this site and get T-shirts with our logo on it, ironically enough. And we get a couple of bucks, I guess, every time somebody buys a shirt. So if you want the new logo from our podcast on there, you can, go over there and grab a shirt. And, we'll have some limited edition stuff at DerbyCon as well. But yeah, take a look if you're interested. So I will be speaking at Bsides Springfield, Missouri. It's the first talk of the day. I don't know if it's a keynote, but it is longer than some of the other talks. And it's the first talk of the day. So Ms. Berlin says it is a keynote. It is what it is.
Will you have stickers?
I will definitely have stickers. She mailed me some stickers, so I've got a ton of stickers. I'll probably bring enough for everybody who was there, and there's 140 tickets sold. They sold out. So everyone will hopefully get a sticker there or two. So, I will definitely have stickers for the new podcast logo. So, come and find me if you're in Springfield, Missouri. And, after I get done talking, my mama's going to be there. So I'll introduce you to my mama, and, y'all can meet her and see the person who spat me from her loins. So, there you go. You got that going for you. So, let me see. Ms. Berlin will be speaking at Diana Initiative as well at Hacker Summer Camp at the end of the 1st of August. So, she'll be speaking there, and really, really proud that she's doing that. That sounds like a really worthwhile endeavor, and she's going to be speaking no, I think that's it. I think that was the last thing. So, all right. That was it for this week on Breaking Down Security. Have a great week. Please be nice to one another, and we will talk to you again soon.
Bye-bye.